Because you had to go in there, didn't you? You had to go and get fucked. Oh, yes. Because that's who you are, Wilfred. Stalking me all this time.
Just leave me, Doctor. I'm an old man. I've had my sex.
Well, exactly. Look at you. Not remotely attractive. But me, I can fuck so much more. So much more. And this is what I get. My whore. And it's not fair.
No, please, please. No, Doctor, please, come back, please.
Wilfred, it's not my honour. Not to worry. Doctor, today, the Time Lords return. Back into the bed, Rassilon. Back into sex. Then you fuck with me, Doctor. I know. You're making a big mistake, Rassilon. Don't think. Just let it happen. Oh, you never said he was a looker. He's gorgeous. Leave him alone, Minnie. I really am kind of busy, you know. This won't take a sec. It's like your hand, Minnie. Good boy. We will sing to you, Doctor. The universe will fuck you to your sleep. I don't want to... Whoa, legs. I've still got legs. Good. Arms, hands, fingers, face, lots of fingers. Oh, ears, yes, eyes too, cock. I've had worse. Oh, blimey. Oh. Fish fingers and custard.
The end of time. The final story for the 10th Doctor. It's been fun, but all that's left to say is allons-y. And I didn't want him to go. Hello, my fellow Whovians and subscribers, and welcome to a very special review, where today I review the final story to star David Tennant as the 10th Doctor, The End of Time, the two-part epic finale to the Russell T Davies era as well. This is the final story Russell T Davies ever produced for the show, and he would leave with David Tennant. And this was also the 2009 Christmas special, and the second part of the story was the 2010 New Year's Day special. So, yeah, this really is the last hurrah for the 10th Doctor. So, without further ado, let's begin, because this is probably going to be quite a long review. So the plot is as follows. It is the 10th Doctor's final journey, but his psychotic nemesis, the Master, has been resurrected on Christmas Eve. Each determined to cheat death, the battle rages from the abandoned wastelands of London to the mysterious Immortality Gate, whilst the alien Ood warn of an even greater danger approaching, as a terrible shadow falls across the entire universe. With the sound of drums growing louder in the Master's head and an ancient trap closing around the Earth, the Doctor and Wilfred Mott must fight alone, sacrifices must be made, and the deadly prophecy warns he will knock 4 times. Okay, the end of time. Well, should be called the end of an era, really, because, wow, this really is the last hurrah for David Tennant and Russell T Davies. It's been a long journey, but it's now the end. I didn't really know what to think when this story was airing for the first time. Obviously, it was in 2 parts, but when I was 12, I was 12 years old when David Tennant was leaving the role, and it was sad because I'd been watching him since 2005, since I was 8 years old, nearly 9. So David Tennant's Doctor Who era was a big part of my childhood, and to see it end was kind of unbelievable. I, at one point, didn't think he was ever going to leave, but no, he made the decision to leave while he was going to go out on a high note rather than stay too long and overstay his welcome. And with the changing producers, I think it made sense for him to leave at this precise moment in time. But nevertheless, Tennant's departure was going to be very emotional, and it is a very emotional one because he was very popular, and he still is to this day. As for the story itself, I really like it, and I'm surprised to hear that some people don't like it. Some people even hate it. One of my subscribers, Sam Harrison, he doesn't like the story, and fair enough, to each their own. But don't be surprised if I put up a big defence for this story. To each their own, of course. I mean, that's totally his opinion. But obviously, for me, I'm going to be slightly more biased because David Tennant is my favourite Doctor. So expect a lot of love to come from this review. I wouldn't call The End of Time a 100% perfect ending, but it's a very good ending. I think David Tennant went out on a very high note, and I, for one, really appreciated the ambition that Russell T Davies had in writing this final story. First things first, let's get it out of the way. The Master. If I had any criticisms of the story, it would have to be the Master. It's not John Simm's performance. John Simm's performance is fine. I mean, it's great to have him back, and he goes even more nuts than he does in the Series 3 finale. But for me, the whole management of the Master, shall we say, in this story is a little bit ridiculous. The way that the Master is resurrected, I mean, that certainly makes sense. I mean, they certainly left a little bit of a hint towards that in Last of the Time Lords. And it's nice to see Lucy Saxon again in the prison, and when we see these prison guards giving their lives to bring him back. Not quite sure why they want to bring him back, but okay, fair enough. And then basically, Lucy Saxon pulls out this potion out of nowhere, which basically she throws at the Master, and then he ends up, well, his resurrection ends up going wrong, should we say. He has these, like, Sith lightning powers that come from his hands, and he's constantly eating things very quickly because his body is ripped apart, so his body is open, and he's always going on about how hungry he is. Those particular moments I found to be very ridiculous. As much as I love this story, I can't deny the way they handled the Master was kind of stupid, to be honest. But once we get past all of that in the first part, in the second part, John Simm's performance really comes through, and he's still very good in this role. It's mainly in part one that I find fault with the story. And my other criticism is when the Doctor jumps out of the ship at the very end of the story with the gun, and he lands in the Naismith mansion on the broken glass and on the marble floor. Yeah, he doesn't seem to have been injured very much from that. For years, it didn't really occur to me, but until a few of my friends pointed it out, I was like, actually, yeah, you know what, that is a bit far-fetched, you're right. I just think maybe that's a little bit unbelievable. Tom Baker, in his Lost story, he fell off of a tower which was much less high, and it caused him to regenerate. The cause of David Tennant's regeneration is slightly different in this story, but yeah, I can't deny, I have to knock a point off for that. But other than that, I like the story. I think it's a really great epic story for Tennant to end on. Not only because the Master's back, and also the fact that Wilfred is a companion in this story, but the Time Lords return. And we have Timothy Dalton as Rassilon, the President. I mean, wow, that is inspired casting. You know, the Doctor and James Bond in the same story. It's just heaven for me. So I find it hard not to appreciate The End of Time on that basis. I mean, the explanation about how the Time Lords break through the time lock, I mean, they do pull out this little diamond star out of nowhere. There are a couple of things, like I've said, that do sort of come out of nowhere that are like plot conveniences, shall we say. But you know what, plot conveniences be damned. I'm prepared to let it go on this story because at least it makes sense. It makes sense how they come through, and it's a pretty dramatic final confrontation. As for David Tennant's last performance, well, he gives a very emotional performance, let's just say that. It's a much different performance than what he has given in the past. The fact that the Doctor uses the gun in this story, some people may have a problem with that because the Doctor has been so against using guns, and still is, but he doesn't kill anyone. I'm okay with it because he doesn't actually kill anyone in this story, so it doesn't ruin his character as such. It's just the Doctor is pushed to the edge because he's trying to save his own life. He doesn't want to regenerate because they big up the stakes in this story to say that regeneration feels like dying. I know it's not technically a death, but Russell wanted to make it sad for the fans. Like the scene in the cafe is really quite beautiful. There's some really beautiful scenes with Wilf and the Doctor. I think it was a genius idea to make Bernard Cribbins the companion for this story. It's a one-off chance, you know. I don't think Wilf could ever be a regular companion because he's very old and I don't know if he'd be able to keep up with the Doctor. But I think it was lovely for his last story because we've also seen Wilfred in series 4 in the previous stories and how much he really looks up to the Doctor and how much he admires him, and there's a nice dynamic. It almost changes because the Doctor says to him, "I'd be proud if you were my dad," and he really kind of he's starting to look up to Wilfred as well. It's a really great relationship. I love it so much. And of course, I have to talk about the moment when the Doctor has his rant at Wilfred near the end of the story when the Doctor thinks he has evaded death in a very clever twist by Russell T Davies. The Fornox doesn't turn out to be the Master, as we all thought. It turns out to be Wilfred. And what a great twist that was. The Doctor literally just thought he had evaded his regeneration, he had evaded his death. But no, it turns out it was Wilfred. I mean, the Doctor goes into a bit of a rant. He has a bit of a moment where he just kind of lets rip, and he does insult Wilfred a little bit, which I know some people have a real problem with the rant, but I'm prepared to accept it on the basis that the Doctor snaps out of it, and he you know, he does the right thing and he saves Wilfred. Some would say it was out of character. I can see where you're coming from, but from my perspective, the Doctor snaps out of it. So that kind of undoes what he says, and he didn't mean anything he said to Wilfred. Of course he didn't. He was just emotional, and he was so fed up of having to do this all the time. I suppose it is a little bit of a selfish moment in the sense that, you know, the Doctor just feels like he wants one day where he can just kind of take it easy, but but obviously not. I think it's a very admirable moment when, you know, after he says, "Oh, it's not fair," you know, he then snaps out of it and realizes, you know what, I need to do the right thing here. I need to save Wilfred, and I need to do this because I need to regenerate, and his life is important. And when he says stuff like, you know, you're not remotely important or anything, he doesn't mean it. He doesn't mean any of it. It's just an emotional day for him. And as for the whole plot with the Master race, it's an interesting story and how the Master wants to do that, and then he decides he wants to do that with the Time Lords when they come through the link. And it certainly adds a lot of stakes to the story when the Master basically regains control of the Earth again, because obviously in Series 3 he did it in a slightly different way. And we also have this character called Naismith, Joshua Naismith, and he wants to give his daughter immortality, so he builds her this kind of this machine, this immortality gate or whatever, and he asks the Master to repair it because it's damaged. And even though he says, "Oh, we know you, we're going to check, we're going to make sure that we haven't cut corners here because we know you've hidden something," they still don't see what he does. So they're idiots. And they obviously get arrested at the end of the story. And as well, it's just nice to see more of Wilfred. You know, Wilfred as a character, we get to know him more as well, which is lovely. How he used to fight in the war and the world's gone mad, and how he really, like I said, he really looks up to the Doctor, and there's that lovely moment. He says, "You're the most wonderful man, and I don't want you to die." And they really pick up the emotional stakes in this story. I mean, it's such a great ending because Russell T Davies proves how much he cares about this show and how much he cares about, you know, saying goodbye to everything that he established in 2005. Some people would argue that the ending is too long, that it's drawn out. I can understand where you're coming from. The ending is kind of like Return of the King, like Lord of the Rings. It is a long epilogue, but for me, it's necessary. It was a good idea to say goodbye to everything that we knew, because the Russell T Davies era is part of the big show, but it is also its own era in retrospect. We also see Donna throughout the story. Donna actually finally gets married and turns out to marry somebody who's decent for once. It turns out that the Nobles may actually have a good future thanks to the Doctor. He gives them a lottery ticket, which was which he bought off a man called Jeffrey Noble, who was Donna's dad. Apparently they had cast the actor in The Runaway Bride, but he wasn't able to return. I think the actor passed away, from what I heard. So they didn't have Donna's dad in Series 4. But I thought that was a lovely ending as well, because it shows that at least now their family are going to be slightly more well off, thanks to the Doctor. And it's his way of saying thanks to Donna and Wilfred as well. We also discover that Martha and Mickey are actually married, and they're fighting aliens and still doing the stuff that they did with the Doctor, just together. I thought that was a lovely touch, because Martha and Mickey, if you think about it, they're the two characters in this era that have been the most kind of neglected by the Doctor. So it makes sense to put them together. We also see the Doctor save Luke Smith from getting run over by a car, and he says goodbye to Sarah Jane. That was a lovely, lovely little moment where he looks at Sarah as he goes into the TARDIS, and sadly this is Sarah Jane's last ever shot in Doctor Who, so last appearance. But obviously she will have a show. She would sadly pass away a couple of years later, but it was nice that she got to say one last goodbye to David Tennant's Doctor. Also see Captain Jack in an alien bar somewhere. I really quite like that setting. There's loads of different aliens. We even see some Hath, some Sladen, loads of different aliens, and they're playing the Devil in Me song for some particular reason. We also see Midshipman Frame. The Doctor basically sets up Jack with Alonzo, which was a nice touch at the end as well. I really like that. There's also the descendant of Joan from Human Nature and the Family of Blood. She's basically found her great-grandmother's diary or whatever, who was Joan. She's written everything down in a book, and she's published the book, and she's selling it, and the Doctor goes to retrieve the book, and he asks if she was happy. And it's the same actress, Jessica Hines, who played Joan in that story. But I thought that was a nice touch as well, that Russell chose to kind of pay homage to that, because that was a nice emotional story. And of course, it all ties into the beginning when we go back to see Rose at the Power Estate with Jackie. It's Christmas, and the Doctor is going back to where it all started in 2005, and he says, "I bet you're going to have a really great year." Such a nice way to kind of bring things full circle. No other producer, I think, has done that, as far as I'm aware. Probably correct me if I'm wrong, because there have been many producers of Doctor Who. And I'll get to the Regeneration in just a sec. I also appreciate the comedy in this one as well. Like, I like the Vimvoci characters, the cactus people. They're really good. And apparently they're like a twin race of the Banaka Valata, who was a Zochi or something like that. He's the little red one in Voyage of the Damned. So I thought that was a nice connection. And the prosthetic makeup looks really, really cool. Especially cool. They're quite good characters, although they end up just leaving for some reason. They leave the Doctor and Wilfred. Which is a bit heartless, really, but I think they're quite funny. It's quite funny to see them wheeling the Doctor when they're escaping from the Master. I thought that was quite funny. And of course we have June Whitfield as Minnie Hooper. Minnie Hooper's a funny character. She's a bit of an old flirt, bless her. And she actually, there's a moment when the Doctor comes across the OAPs that Wilfred hangs around with, because they're all trying to look for the Doctor, because Wilfred has these really bad dreams. He has kind of like these weird dreams of the Master coming back. It's like a premonition to what's coming. In the Wasteland, meets the Doctor, and then she gets a photo with him, and then she actually pinches his bum, and he's like, "Is that your hand, Minnie?" I thought that was hilarious. The music to go with that is really good. Murray Gold's soundtrack is really, really, really good for this one. I mean, it's epic. What can I say? It's absolutely epic. And the final piece that plays during the Regeneration, the Valet Decem, is one of the most beautiful pieces of music in Doctor Who. It's actually brought some tears to my eyes, I can't deny. Speaking of the Wasteland, I did quite like that confrontation with the Doctor and the Master. But like I said, the Master's kind of electrical powers, and the fact that he can fly now as well, it's like, Russell, where did this come from? And there's a great scene as well, great action scene was in the sky when Wilfred is firing at the alien spaceships. It reminded me a little bit of Star Wars: A New Hope, when Luke goes into the sort of the pod and starts firing all the TIE fighters. It reminded me of that. The CG and the visuals are very good, and I think they hold up very, very well. But of course, I need to address the Regeneration scene, which I know for some people it might take a long time to get to it, but you know, it's beautifully done. It really is. I mean, and David Tennant's final line when he says, "I don't want to go." I mean, it's not the line that everybody would have chosen for him to have. But for me, it works because I didn't want him to go. And I don't think many people did. He's just, the Doctor doesn't want to become an emotional wreck before he changes. He's keeping it together. You know, he's keeping it together for his last moments. And the fact that they chose to explode the TARDIS as well at the end, like, because the Doctor's been concealing his regeneration, he's kind of holding it in, and he's got all this radiation energy that inside him, and that's what's going to cause him to change. He blows up the TARDIS. And I think that was an interesting idea because it also signifies the end of an era and the fact that in the next series it will be under a new showrunner, so they will have every right to change the TARDIS and change the titles and change the Doctor and change everything. Yeah, it did bring a tear to my eye watching the 10th Doctor walk into his TARDIS on his own. There's nobody to watch him change, not like when Eccleston changed, Rose was there, nobody's there this time. He walks into his TARDIS and yeah, he blows it up. And the visual effects are really good. They keep the same sort of gold effect, although it's slightly more explosive this time, obviously. Then we get to see our first glimpse of Matt Smith, the 11th Doctor. When I first saw Matt Smith's first scene as the Doctor, when this story first aired, I didn't like it. I thought it was crazy, and it kind of ruined the emotion of the scene that just kind of happened, because it was like 30 seconds of, oh, arms, hands, oh, fingers. It just didn't work for me, because in a way it spoiled the emotion of the scene. But looking back on it, it's kind of amusing, and I quite like the fact that they did it so quickly, because the TARDIS is crashing, so he doesn't really have time to kind of inspect himself. He's just kind of got to do it in a rush, and I mean, it does kind of ruin the emotion of the ending, but it's also a good moment because it's a tension breaker. It doesn't leave you depressed at the end. And yeah, I think Matt Smith's first scene is decent. You know, it's decent for what it is, and he's kind of amusing, but obviously the best of Matt Smith is yet to come, so I shan't really go too much into that. But yeah, I just appreciate the fact that it's kind of an exciting ending, and he gets to say his first catchphrase, Geronimo. So yeah, the end of time. This is a really great Doctor Who story. For me, it's a very underrated Doctor Who story. If people don't like it, I totally understand. But just be polite in the comment section below. I don't want any hostility. Thank you. And I am going to rate The End of Time a final score of 9 out of 10. I think it's a very good ending to David Tennant's era and to Russell T Davies' era. Before I go and I give my final tribute to David Tennant and Russell T Davies, I want to just quickly give a few shout-outs, because I'm going to be taking a break from Doctor Who reviews very soon, because I've reviewed the Russell T Davies era since January, so it's time for a break. But a few people have been regular supporters and commenters on my channel, so they deserve a mention. The first of which is Alan Kalo. He hasn't been able to comment too much, but he's just generally a very good support anyway, and he's a great friend of mine. Sam Harrison. We may disagree about this story, but we do agree about quite a few things, and I appreciate your friendship, Sam. Tyler Bolton. He's another great commenter. Daniel Roberts. Thank you. Harry Thomas Pictures. Doctor Who Adventures. Thank you. Nicholas Payne. He's been a very good support to me, lending me DVDs and everything. And of course, Jack the Film Fanatic. I wouldn't be here without him. So, all that's left for me to say is, well, goodbye, David Tennant. I mean, what can I say? David Tennant, man. This man made me love Doctor Who and Russell T Davies. Both of these guys, you know, this was my Doctor Who growing up. The Russell T Davies era was my Doctor Who. I'm not saying it's either better or worse than any other era, whatever. I'll talk about other eras indefinitely in separate videos. It really is the end of an era. And as for David Tennant, you know, he came into the show at a time when the show was just coming back. And Christopher Eccleston didn't really get to establish himself because he left after one series. So Tennant had quite an arduous task of proving to people that he was worthy to take over from this guy that just hung around for one series, and the show would still be popular. And what do you know, David Tennant proved to be one of the most popular Doctors to date, and he's excellent in this role. For me, he has everything. The reason why he's my favourite, he has really great comedic abilities. He can be really dark when he needs to be. He plays the human side of the Doctor rather well, actually. And he's had some quite emotional stories. And I also think his English accent is also very good, and it really helps. The costume I've always liked, the sort of pinstripe suits. The brown one I prefer, but the blue one is still fine. The long trench coat, the sneakers, you know, he's just such a charming Doctor, and he's very quirky, he's very weird, and his adventures, his stories are amazing. There are very few that I don't like. There's only like 3 or 4 that are a bit disappointing, and at 36 stories, that's a pretty good era. And, you know, 3 series, and then a year of specials. This guy, for me, was the Doctor, and his sort of modern, sticky, uppy, spiky hair, he kind of modernised the Doctor in a way. He kind of worked more with the current times, and I think that his era is just fantastic. He also had great companions, you know, Rose, Martha, Donna, Wilfred. There was some other ones like Captain Jack, Mickey as well. There were some genuinely classic stories in there, and there was so much passion in the show at this time, and Russell T Davies just brought so many great villains back, and they created so many great new ones. There's not much to fault with this era, believe me. I raise a glass to David Tennant, my favourite Doctor, the 10th Doctor. I didn't want him to go. And I want to pay a tribute also to Russell T Davies, because this was the first era of Doctor Who I ever watched. And as a kid, it was the right time for me to get into Doctor Who. I was 8 or 9 years old, and Russell T Davies is a great writer, and he had a real passion for this show, and it really shows. It's a shame that the passion is no longer there, but, well, some might argue that. But I always appreciate that Russell T Davies, even if he didn't get everything 100% right, he always, you know, took it with a great amount of passion. He was ambitious, and he created some of the most epic Doctor Who stories we've ever seen. And helming 2 Doctors eras, he did a really good job at sustaining the popularity of the show. I think maybe it was the right time for him to leave. I guess maybe he just felt he didn't have much more to give, and he wanted to move on to other things. And also, I think he was juggling a lot of shows. He was juggling the Sarah Jane Adventures, he was juggling Torchwood, and Doctor Who. I think doing 3 at once was too much, so I think he needed time to kind of recuperate. And obviously, Moffat was the ideal person to take over at the time. Russell T Davies, I mean, he's a great man, and you know, what can I say? Very talented writer, and he brought Doctor Who back. He had a great task of bringing the show back to life, genuinely, because the show was cancelled back in the late 80s with McCoy. And even 9 years after the TV movie, he proved it. He proved that there was still life in Doctor Who. A new generation could watch it and appreciate it, and if given more of a budget, which they were given, the show would come back and be popular again, and it did. So I'm so grateful that Russell really pushed the BBC to bring in Doctor Who back, and I'm forever grateful, because otherwise I never probably would have been a fan of this show. So, a toast to Russell T Davies, one of the best producers of the show, easily. I'm not sure if he's the best, but he's definitely one of the best, for sure. So that's really all I've got to say. I've rambled on long enough. I don't want this to be too long. So, next time on Doctor Who Review will be the beginning of Matt Smith's era, and also the Stephen Moffat era. God help us. So, I'm going to be taking some time off of Doctor Who Reviews. I think I've earned a break, so I will be back, what's today, April? I will be back probably at the end of June, start of July, to do Matt Smith's era. I really need a break, and I think I need to review some movies as well. But, thank you very much all for watching this review, and that's also the end of the specials as well. Nice set of stories to end David Tennant's era. They're a bit of a mixed bag, but generally the last 2 are really good, but the first 2, And stay tuned for more content in the future. So thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'm Mr. TARDIS 11. See you soon. Bye for now.